Nice timing.
Yo, I was gonna say like hold the stream.
Wait, I have to sneeze.
Please.
How is everyone? It's been a while. Thank you for stopping by. Today we are very excited to be interviewing Garry Schyman, the composer for many things, but my personal favorite, the Bioshock games. So we're just going to jump into that. I have a bunch of questions here on my iPad written up by our research assistant. So let me pull that up. Bam. And bam. Hi there. Oh, phone call. That's okay. I'm going to pull up the game while that happens.
Cool.
Alrighty then. So just exit.
So thanks to the new Nakey Jakey video, I was just playing Switch. Did I do that right?
I think you did, yeah.
I pressed B, like, oh yeah, let's confirm that.
Oh yeah, the Nintendo controls.
Yeah, it's gonna be a slight adjustment.
Are you going to just sit there?
As compared to what? Standing?
Not standing, rowing.
Rowing? Hadn't planned on it.
So you expect me to shoulder
What's
the
this?
burden?
No. But I do expect you to do all the rowing.
And why is that?
Coming here was your idea.
My idea?
I've made it very clear that I don't believe in the exercise.
The rowing?
No. Imagine that's wonderful exercise.
Then what?
The entire thought experiment.
Excuse me. How much longer?
One goes into
You
an
know,
experiment knowing
I'm trying to remember.
One does not
It
undertake an
was
experiment knowing one
maybe
has
in the
failed.
middle
Can we get back to the rowing?
of the
I suggest you
process.
do. We're never
About
going to
maybe
get there.
they were
No,
about
I mean,
50,
I'd greatly
60%.
appreciate it if you would assist.
Yeah, well,
Perhaps
the
you should
first
ask
game.
him.
Okay, the first
I
game.
imagine he has a
I
greater
don't know when
interest
they
in
actually
getting there than
started
I
the
do.
first
I
game.
suppose it
I know
does.
that I worked
no
on it
point
for
in
about
asking.
6 or 7
not?
months.
Right. Okay. So that's
So is that common? Do you usually have?
Because he doesn't row.
He doesn't row?
No, he doesn't row.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Engine, or is it?
We've arrived.
Yeah, it can vary. It really depends on the development team and when they want to bring in a composer. When I first started, first game actually I did score
He's
some
not
games
moving.
in the 90s.
He will.
But
Eventually.
really, the sort
Suppose
of
he does.
what you think of now as gaming was 2004 when I just scored Destroy All Humans. And I was brought in really at the very end of that process, which made sense to me because I was a film and
Shall we
TV
tell him
composer.
when we'll be
So that
returning?
was, the typical. I mean, you don't hire a composer
At least that's something.
usually, but not always, but
Hey,
usually until the
somebody
end, and then the
leaving me
composer
here?
comes
I'm
on and
sick of
scores the film.
It
Which
does seem
is,
like a
I
dreadful
really once it's edit locked, but that of course rarely happens. But still, it's close to being done, and you score it, and then it goes on to air if it's television, or it goes in the theaters a month or two later. So that made sense. But as I've been involved in gaming, it's really
Booker
varied from
DeWitt.
project to project,
I
and
guess you're
sometimes you are
expecting me?
brought in fairly early, and sometimes you're brought in, later. I would say in games usually they're at least halfway done.
Good luck with that.
But then that can get extended as they run into trouble, or it's not exactly working the way they thought it was, and then all of a sudden they take more time to make it right, to play test and in Bioshock Infinite there was quite
Is
a
anyone here?
significant change
Hello?
when we went to E3. I'd been hired and I was writing some cues and things, but not, really hadn't quite focused in and found the direction. And then we went to E3, and then the demo at E3, that was when the game was first announced publicly. And there was a demo there, and the demo, of course, included the Elizabeth character. However, she was not nearly as significant at that point as she became. But because the press was only writing about Elizabeth, it seemed to be Ken Levine, who is the creative director, had sort of an epiphany and thought, really, she needs to be really at the center of this game, and that required a rejiggering of the whole game and rethinking, and so really it was quite a change. but it had a profound effect on the music, because when I heard that, I said, well, I need to write an Elizabeth theme.
Right.
So that's when I wrote the Elizabeth theme, and Ken really loved that, and it sort of became a template for how the rest of the score would go.
What in the world is...
Yeah, I did a fair amount of research on, well, I mean, I've played all the Bioshock games multiple times, just as like, you know, as full experiences, they're great, but I mean, that's a super broad statement, but like, I was doing research on Infinite specifically, and they were talking about the production of the games, whereas like the other games is all kind of solitary, like it's just Jack Ryan in the first one, and then like what's her name, Rosie. But then in the third one, they like were trying to go into that, but then the Elizabeth character, like you said, they took it to E3 and people like
Alright.
they love the idea
Looks like they expect
of
me
the
to sit in a
secondary
fancy
sidekick
chair.
backup character, and it's like, you know, thematically it doesn't really fit the mood, but it still fits really well. And the musical cues for Elizabeth is really
Make yourself ready, Pilgrim. The bindings are there as a safeguard.
No, God damn it!
Ascension.
when you were making the music for this,
Ascension in the count of 5.
was there a point
Count of 4.
No.
3.
you know,
2.
they
1.
were telling you
Ascension.
we need you to do
Ascension.
something that's still Bioshock, but different?
5,000.
Well, when I started Infinite, we definitely,
10,000.
the word was, we definitely didn't want to sound like that it had to have its own unique approach to music, which I totally agreed with, because I felt, though it's connected to Bioshock, and in fact, you do visit Rapture briefly.
Right, with the bird.
And I did, in fact, write some music for that section of the game that's very much in the style of that original game. But other than that, it really kind of needed its own style, and that was just that was from their perspective and my perspective. So there was never any question that the music was not going to have its own unique approach and style.
Right.
And it unfolded. It really was a cool process. It took a while to sort of find that, but in games like Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, it's very common, because these games are being made by very creative people,
Right.
really open to really creative solutions, and don't want the usual, you know. So it really was an opportunity to do cool stuff, and it's also at the same time it's a challenge to really find that approach and do something fresh, and find something that's not only fresh but fits the game. You know, it's got you're scoring a game, so
Right.
it's got to work with the game. It can't just be novel sounding music, you know.
It's got to fit the theme for sure.
You're scoring a game. You know?
Yeah. So we interviewed a little while ago. We talked to Austin Wintry about his work on Banner Saga, and how it was like talking with or working with the sound designers at the same time as composing really affects your process in a way, because in that game it's very like menu based, and a lot of like, you know, you're sorting through menus and a lot of like cursor movement sounds, so it's the score has to be very understated. But whereas something like Bioshock, it's very cinematic and in your face. Was there like a lot of considerations you had to come up with working with the sound design team, or did you do a lot of the sound design yourself, or did you have influence with that at all?
No, I was not involved in sound design at all, and in fact, I was never provided any sound design or asked to match or make sure that it didn't fight sound design.
Right.
I was aware of it. You know, I mean, you always have to be aware of it, like you are in a film. Like if you're writing music for a scene with a helicopter in it, you know, you have to be aware of that, because you know your quiet music is not going to cut through that. You know what I mean? You still there?
Yeah.
Still? Okay, sorry, I'm looking at the
Yeah,
screen.
sorry, I had to fix one of the.
Down, down. Just the screen went into a whole different vibe.
Yeah,
So,
no, I was fixing the volume levels because the game audio was way louder than us talking.
all right, so yeah, the you know, and you know, so you have to be aware of it when it's significant. But there was never any like, wow, you're going to be fighting the sound of the ocean here, so be aware of that.
Right.
I just wrote the music, and they, of course, you know, the process in game music, not always, but you almost always is you write the music, and they go, yeah, that sounds right. Let's put it in game. You know, while it's some build of the game, and let's hear how it's working. Let's see how it's working. So they're testing all the time. If they had any issues, they would just say, you know, that there's a problem here because it's fighting sound effects or something.
Right.
And
We need you to change.
that actually they never said that to me. They never came to me and said that's a problem. It's fighting some sound that we have, or it's not going to cut because the ocean's so loud here or something.
Right. And a lot of, well, not so much. It's kind of hard to tell in Infinite, but like in Bioshock 1, for sure, with like Beyond the Sea and all the license stuff that you were using, did you have a say in that? Because I know there's so many different positions in game audio. There's like the audio director and the programmer, composer, sound designer, all those different things. But were you, because like...
No.
No? None of that?
No, completely out of that loop. On both Bioshock, all the Bioshocks, I was just, you know, asked to provide the underscore.
Right. That makes sense. So at what point did you like start to get into composition? Like when did you realize you wanted to do this as a career?
Well, I guess I had studied music and I loved music, and you know, as a kid, and I went to before I went to USC, I went to Sonoma State University, and which I loved it up there. It was beautiful. But I was not a music major, but all I took was music classes. They actually had a very good music department, and I was obsessed with music. I just loved it. And then I decided I wanted to be a composer, and it made sense that if I was going to be a composer, I knew that the opportunities for composers were either to teach, if we were going to just be like, you know, or, you know, I mean, there's no real concert composer gigs. There's a few people who find their way, but usually they're at some university or whatever. And I didn't really want to teach. That wasn't what I wanted to do. Even though I do teach at USC now, that's something that came much later in my career, and it's just one day a week, you know, I go to USC and teach. So but in any event, so then I decided I would go to USC and study composition, and that's what I did. So I left Sonoma and I went to USC, studied there, got a degree in music composition, but with the idea that I wanted to be a film and television composer, because that was a way you could make a living writing music, and you know, having an orchestra play it, and those were my goals. My goals were not necessarily, you know, I didn't want to be the next Beethoven or anything. I just wanted to write music, cool music, and I loved music for film. You know, and had a number of heroes in that were working, you know, like Bernard Herrmann and Jerry Goldsmith, etc. So I did it, and you know, I got very lucky to start working for Mike Post and Pete Carpenter, who were two very busy television composers. And this is the 1980s, and I was working on television shows like The A-Team and Magnum P.I. and Greatest American Hero, and just cranking. They're one of their ghosts. There was like four of us because they had so many shows going, they couldn't write it all themselves.
Right.
So I was just, you know, it was all paper and pencil and orchestra playing it, you know, and oh yeah, it's every week you had an orchestra. You'd show up and with your music, and you know, it'd be played kind of semi in tune. And they didn't even. No one's going to care. No one gives a shit. It's just going to go in. It's going to be gun battles and car chases.
Right. Well, so when we were doing research for this stream, yeah, a lot of the A-Team stuff came up, and our research assistant is actually of that era. he was saying he was so excited when he found out that you worked on the A Team. He's like, I grew up with the A Team, like the orchestral like music for that was like so influential for him. It was really cool to see him reacting to that.
I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
So I was with all of us were at the spotting session for the first episode, the pilot, and we all watched it, and afterwards we all looked at each other and go, "This is so dumb. This is going to go off the air after 3 episodes." We were all convinced, and we were all so totally wrong. It was a huge hit, and we were just like, "This is so dumb. These guys running around, it just seemed goofball to us at that moment."
Right.
And
but it's not goofy. But yeah, I mean, I could see how it would be hard to, or I don't know if it was hard, but it's like, hard to tell that something.
We did not predict its success. Let's go.
Exactly, yeah. And, they made a movie out of it, and they made, and Magnum PI is like a household name to a certain degree. So
that was a cool show. That was a fun show to work on, Magnum PI. I like that guitar riff. That was all cool. That was fun to work. I mean, I didn't write that. That's Mike Post and B. Carpenter. I used those themes, as you write. You'd use a little bit of them, and then you'd go on and underscore the scene.
Right. Yeah, that's. I remember, like, I was a little young for that, but my mom would watch it a fair amount, and I remember, like, that was like one of the first times I was like, "Oh, sweet, that guitar is sweet." At least with TV, because like you listen to music and it's like, okay, yeah, I'd like this guitar, I like this other thing, but then when you're listening to like TV, it's like, oh, or watching TV, it's like, oh, this is not what I expected.
Yeah, that was the thing that was their sort of ticket, because they took and infused scoring with pop music. So it was like an orchestra with a band.
Right. Yeah, the orchestra is like was a big thing. I don't know, at the time where we were looking at that game you worked on, Voyeur.
Yeah.
And it was saying that it was one of the earlier games to employ like a full orchestra. So did you have to was there a lot of push for that? Did you have to fight to get that done, or were they just like, yeah, have an orchestra, or,
Well, okay, that's an interesting story. This is how I put it, because I don't know, I don't really know the absolute answer. Maybe someone can do the research someday, but I say it's either the first game or one of the first games to have an orchestral score.
Right.
And the reason it was possible to have an orchestral score, but because it used a new technology called CDI, Philips Electronics.
Oh yeah, like the system.
Yes, and so really it was a video game. I mean, really, actually, the term video game is the most appropriate term for it, because there's all these little movie vignettes that you would see, and then you would try to decide. It was like a Rear Window kind of. I don't know if you know that movie, the famous Hitchcock movie. So you're trying to find out if there's a murder. You think there's a murder, and you call the police. And so if you make this decision, then you see this movie. And if you make this, so it was like a movie tree. So it was this kind of a weird hybrid. But because it was all on a CD, which at that time was a marvelous new technology. That was pretty wild. You get 700 megabytes on one disc. And which was at the time, it's hard to tell people. Like, I had a 6 megabyte hard drive, the first hard drives, and it cost me like
a lot,
$100. It was like some stupid amount of money. It crashed on me. It was a piece of crap. But that was like 6 megabytes, But it was a huge improvement over what we had, the floppy disks. So so you could put compressed music. This is the point. So it wasn't like the typical games of that time, where you had basically in-game little synthesizers.
Right.
You could do
sound chips.
Yeah, they're little sound chips, and MIDI would try to trigger them. And you could only do. I mean, people did remarkable things considering how restricted they were.
Of course, yeah.
But this permitted me to actually write a score that got recorded, that then got compressed and used in the game. So that's what permitted an orchestral score, because most of the other games you couldn't even put an orchestral score in them if you wanted to, because the technology did not permit that.
Right.
Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So I don't even remember. I think a friend of mine, a producer that I worked with before, had gotten involved in games and just called me and said, "Would you like to score this video game that I'm doing?" And I said, "Sure, it sounds cool."
Right.
And so it was just like determined. Yeah, we have the budget. It was a modest budget, but we had the budget to record with orchestra, and so we did. And it was just another gig, and I went on. But I think it has turned out to be either the first or one of the very first games with an orchestral score.
It was definitely like it was either like top 3 or it was the first one. I should have written it down, but it was really impressive because I do a lot in my own personal time. I like researching retro game stuff. So like the Philips CDI, the 3DO, all these things that were like early CD adopters that had like CD quality audio, as compared to like one of the early streams we did on this was the original Super Mario Brothers on the NES, which only had like 4 sound channels, and they had to get so creative with those like restrictions.
Exactly.
Have you had any experience working with like super restricted sound budget? I guess not like monetarily, but either composition wise, or like have you tried using the sound chips?
No, that wasn't my thing. There's guys who could do that better than me. So I was more of a traditional composer, and I wasn't offered it, and so I can't say I would have turned it down, but I probably would have just said, no, that's not what I do. So it wasn't an opportunity that presented itself, and I never did it. No.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I thought maybe you had gotten interested in it, but understandably, it's like a whole other entire world.
Even after doing Voyeur, and I did a couple other games. There was a Voyeur 2 actually, but even after doing those, I didn't have much interest. Video games was a sort of a side. It was not nearly with the industry. It wasn't 1/100th the industry that it is now.
Right.
It was just a little kind of novelty.
Right.
Literally, that's kind of how I think I thought of it. It was like this novelty. And it was like, okay, I'll write music for that. You pay me and I'll write the music. And it was fun to do. And I enjoyed it. And I got some nice cues out of it. I put it on, the music's online. You can hear it.
For Voyeur.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Part of that, too, is like, like you were saying earlier, it was more video than it was game at that point. It was kind of like a pick-your-own-adventure book, but in video format. With games like Night Trap, where that was the whole idea, was basically it's just like little movies, and you can like go through one way or another, and different scenes play out. But now, video games have become so much more cinematic, like Bioshock. And I saw a statistic recently that video games make more money than TV and movies combined.
Oh yeah, for the last 4 or 5, for many years.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to me when like my brothers or their wives who are a generation above me, they'll be I hear them saying like, oh, like video games aren't art, and it's like, are you kidding? Like video games are so many different arts combined into one. There's the music, the graphics, the design, the everything is so, I don't know, it's so like conglomerated into one huge art form. It's great, and it brings people together. So
years ago, like I'm talking about the 1940s and 50s, people said that films weren't art. The films were just sort of a novelty. So that's just the older, literally, and I'm of the older generation, but I am hip to it because I've been involved in it, and I can't say I was hip to it when I really got into it. In 2004, when I got hired for Destroy Humans, I was like, wow, this is really cool technology. It was kind of like an epiphany for me to get involved in the industry and go, holy crap, this is cool stuff. And it was creatively really interesting. all of a sudden, people were asking me, and then Bioshock came along. I was like, holy crap! The most interesting music anyone has ever asked me to write has been for video games, by far. And even today, you listen to a lot of film scores. They're very ambient and uninteresting. They work and they underscore the picture, but are they really, like the scores of yesteryear? Some of them are. Some of them are quite wonderful, but a lot of them are really ambient and not very compositionally interesting. They're just sort of sound design, really interesting sound design. And as a composer, in sort of the traditional vein, I like writing music, and I like composing, as one would traditionally define it. And so I feel really fortunate that I've been given these opportunities.
Yeah, and as someone who's scored both, film and games, do you find that you have a preference for games because you can make it more active, or is it kind of?
I don't consider myself a game composer. I consider myself a composer for audio-visual media. I scored a game that just came out, and I do very much love playing picture. And for instance, when I scored Shadow of War, I scored an hour worth of in-game cinematics, and I love that. I love playing picture. So I enjoy that too. The things that I love about games is the creativity, the ability to. In some ways, writing music for games is closer to writing music for the concert hall. It's almost like programmatic music, like Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, where there's a storm, so it's like you're writing music for a moment in the game, and so you have a lot of compositional freedom, that you don't get in a film. The other thing I love about games is the people in the industry. They are almost it's almost uniformly. I love the people that I work with. They're just nice, down to earth, a little nerdy as I am, and really, it's like so much less stressful than working in films generally, where the egos and the craziness, as we all know. Look at the Weinstein aspect. But that's of course the most extreme element of it. But there's still that part of this industry. Definitely, there's a lot of people who are not easy to work with, and so I love the people that I get to work with.
That's great. Yeah, I've had a similar experience, just like with our, all of our sound for picture and game students, who is, as you say, it's more like audio for video. It doesn't matter what the medium is, movies, TV, games, but then people like, they're very humble and like willing to, and like open, like willing to learn, willing to adapt. It's really refreshing as compared to some of the people who come through that are like, yeah, I want to be like or whatever, because there's a fair amount of both of those. There you go. God, I forgot about that part. I haven't played this game in a while. I played the first one a fair amount recently, just because I love that game, and the story is possibly one of the most interesting game stories in a while. But so, is there anything you think besides the humility, is there anything you think that the game and movie video industry could learn from each other?
Well, I think that in some ways we're starting to see films start to emulate games. I think there was a Netflix game film recently. Yeah, exactly. So I think there's going to be cross-pollination, and I think that one thing's like games have sort of notoriously, and of course the Bioshock games are the outliers, because they do have such great stories.
Right.
But a lot of games have lame stories, that they're not, yeah, they're just not interesting in that respect. And so it's possible that this cross-pollination could improve storytelling in games while the technology makes for unbelievable interactivity, so I think there's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming, and maybe VR, maybe I don't know. There's just a lot of opportunities for this cross pollination between these two art forms to do really, really cool stuff. I mean, look at this that we were watching. This is like being in a film.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this is like pretty cool.
Super interactive.
Yeah, so you still can go wherever you want, and so that's I think this this is amazing technology. This is amazing creative technology, and what's going to be in the future. I've not I didn't predict that 18 would be a successful television. So my powers of prediction are weak, but
I think you got out in front of this one.
But I did again when I scored Destroy Humans, I was like, holy crap, this is the future. I was like, it was like the plastics moment in the movie. What's that movie from the 60s where he says, the future is plastics.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
No, I'm blanking too.
Dustin Hoffman.
Right.
But you know what I mean. South of it. But so I feel like I had that moment. Wow, this is the future, and this is going to be. And immediately I said, I really want to focus my career on opportunities here. And then I got lucky, and then I did. Well, I didn't get it. Was I got lucky getting Destroy Humans because then Emily Ridgway, who was the audio director, went on to become the audio director for Bioshock.
Right.
And she hired me for Bioshock, so they didn't even consider anybody else.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really cool because, like you were saying, there's definitely a lot of cross-pollination. We've seen a big, I don't know if it's a push or there's just been a big change in video games recently where story has become so important, even if it's like implied. Like the Dark Souls games are very much like there's no storytelling, but the story is very implied, and if you look for it, you can find it. And then there's the games that are just entirely story-based, like the Telltale games, R.I.P. Or next week, we're actually interviewing Jason Graves, who just did work on Man of Medan, which is a lot like it's the same people that made that game Until Dawn, and it's a lot like those games we were talking about before, where it's a video game where it's different cutscenes.
Yeah.
It's not acted like the old ones were, but it's animated cutscenes that play out differently the way you react to things. It's really interesting.
There's a lot of fascinating stuff going on. By the way, part of the name of the movie is The Graduate.
Thank you. That was going to drive me crazy. You want to figure out? It disappeared. We're going to swap question asking here.
Fortunately, these games aren't violent.
No, of course not.
There's like so much.
There's a lot of head exploding in this one that I did not remember happening.
Oh.
All right. I forgot about this part.
So yeah, I'm guessing that you're a digital performer user. So what kind of
Well, when I started using DP, it was a long time ago. At the time, it was the best application. It was the best one. There was no two ways about it. I had used it when I first started using MIDI. I actually had an Atari 1040 ST. I don't know if you guys.
Oh yeah.
That baby, but that was a cool computer. It was a competitor to Mac, and in some ways, it was better at the time. but it didn't last. But in any event, actually I had I don't even remember the name of that application, but it had a really cool MIDI implementation technology, which I really enjoyed. Um, Actually, there's things you could do with that MIDI software that I still can't do in DP. But in any event, so that it was just really and then once I became like a DP user and have been using it for all these years, I've been reluctant to switch. I think if I switched, I would go to Cubase at this point. A friend of mine, Bear McCreary, was DP user, and he did switch to Cubase, and he was making some pretty good arguments for that change. But so far, I'm sticking with DP just because it's so easy for me to use it, and I just know I'm going to have like a really painful 6 months of working because I'm going, how the hell do I do this simple thing that I just used to do with one keystroke? How do I do this basic thing now that I don't know how to do it?
Right.
So that I'm just sort of maybe reluctant to make that change. The biggest thing you can do with Cubase that you can't do with DP is conform when you're conforming edit changes. Now that's a picture issue, and has to do more with something that you would deal with if you're doing, especially television and film. And so what that means is if they change the edit, which they're constantly doing, it's very easy to conform in Cubase because you can literally stretch and move a whole section of the cue to fit the new edit and then see how it lines up, and then but you can't do that in DP. So that's pretty awesome. I have to say that's pretty amazing to be able to do that.
Yeah, so that's one thing I guess I do a lot. Maybe I guess a little bit more in TV than anything else, but lots of people using Logic for their compositions. And I guess it has some similar features where you can time compress or stretch MIDI regions, so you can kind of get things really nice and timed.
1 second. The chat is asking if you're reading the chat live. No, Jeff, Gary's not reading it live. So if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat, and we will convey them for you. Anyways, sorry.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. So basically, at this point, it's just kind of you're at a point with DP where you can do anything you want, really, right?
Yeah, I know DP. I know it really well, and it does everything I need it to do. The big thing, I'm really waiting for the new Mac Pro to come out. The new the new cheese grater. It's awesome, and I've got a refrigerator full of cheese just waiting to come out. I mean, but the thing is, I want it to come out, but I don't want to buy it for like 2 or 3 months because I just know like the first ones will be bugs and crap, and you just like work that out, and they go, okay, we've got it fixed,
Now I'm ready.
So early next year, I'm gonna invest heavily in the new Mac Pro and new monitors, I'm really gonna upgrade everything. So I'm prepared for that. But maybe not Cubase. Maybe eventually Cubase. We'll see.
Yeah, I hear lots of people singing the praises of Cubase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, next question. Have you referred to yourself as a very intuitive composer that likes to improvise? Has that ever gotten in the way of any assignment with rigid parameters or expectations?
Well, I think that most composers are intuitive composers. I can't help but believe that that's how most. John Williams says that. People ask him how he does it, and he says it's just intuitive. I just kind of know. I just get a sense of what would be right, And then sometimes sometimes your intuition leads you down the wrong path, or it may lead you down a path that you think is cool, but that whoever you're working with is not. So you have to go. Yeah, they're not digging it, and ultimately you are writing music for them and for their project. So in any event, yeah, I am intuitive. That doesn't mean though that I haven't, learned all this technique from years of composing and studying music and listening to composers who I respect and finding out how do they do that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just there, and then it's just like so you have all this intellectual knowledge about how to write music and techniques and and sometimes like even in Bioshock Infinite, I wrote some 12-tone music,
Oh,
which
really?
yeah, there's some serial music in Bioshock Infinite. Not very much, but there's a few cues. I studied with a guy named George Tremblay, and I spent 3 years studying nothing but 12-tone.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
It was pretty intense. He was a brilliant guy. Tom Newman also studied with him, and a lot of people at that time. This is like in the '80s, and the guy was really a kind of an amazing guy to study with. But it's not 12 tone is not easy to use. But the thing is,
It's
George
not
had the
easy to listen to either. You got to be like kind of high up there musically, I think, to kind of start understanding it. In my opinion.
well, famously someone said of Schoenberg's music, it's better than it sounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there were techniques, for instance, that George taught where you take a 12-tone row and you harmonize it with triads.
Hmm.
And so that's actually what I did. I harmonized a 12-tone row with triads, and I found the row that really I loved these chord changes that sort of came with it. And so it really became like a really cool. You wouldn't recognize it as 12-tone because you're hearing anyone, you're hearing a minor or major triad,
Mm-hmm.
but it actually is 12-tone.
Huh.
12 tone is so interesting to me. It's very like fun but eclectic and just like very very weird.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, I just wrote a score for a game called Metamorphosis with another composer, Nikolai Pinsky. And we used, because it's Metamorphosis, if you are familiar with Franz
Kafka.
Kafka, yeah. So he wrote a famous book called Metamorphosis, maybe his most famous work, where you turn into you become an insect and you crawl around. So in this game, you become an insect. But so I thought, like, wow, this is an opportunity to do something because the game is really sort of expressionist, and so I don't know if you know anything about expressionist music, but the early Schoenberg pre-12-tone music, like Parole Lunaire, so was sort of the model. So we actually hired a singer to sing in the style called Sprechgesang or Sprechstimme. You ever heard of that?
No.
So it's like half spoken, half sung.
Yeah.
Oh, that's like all the music I listen to.
So hip hop, right? I'm talking about listen to Parole Lunaire, you'll get the idea.
Okay.
Arnold Schoenberg, and it turned out really cool. It's such a cool score. I'm really so happy with it. It's very weird and odd in some ways, but I think really interesting. And it just fit the game, though. It wasn't like, here's this cool music that we think is cool, and screw you whether it fits the game. No, it really fits the game. It really works beautifully with the game, and at the same time, it's very interesting and creative.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great.
That actually kind of, I don't know why I'm thinking about it, but it leads into a small segue. But yeah, I always, when I was younger, I never really paid attention to
Surprising.
the score and like
Surprising that it
photographs.
didn't kill.
And I remember getting a little bit older and watching some episodes and just thinking about how weird the like the backing soundtrack for that show was, and how many like interesting like musical motifs were being used. And I'm pretty sure listening to it now, kind of having a bit more knowledge on music, it'd probably be like even crazier to be like they were doing this on Nick for a kid show. Like,
Right.
that was a really kind of eye-opening moment. Like, I think when I really started to like figure that I need to pay some serious attention to music outside of
And worse is the insult, because today is the day that marks our
I have a very good friend who scored a lot of that show, Dennis Hannigan,
Oh, really?
and he did tons and tons of it and made a fortune
Yeah, I
in
bet.
performance royalties because it's just like playing everywhere all over the world.
Yeah.
Bought a house in Topanga, like with a view of the. But in any event, yeah, that was a very cool show and very successful for the composers, and they did really hit cool music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really interesting because yeah, it's I think it's just something that
What happened? I hope he doesn't keep.
one of my favorite things I think, and it kind of gets ties back to video games, especially things that kind of happened in the past. Is just I guess playing a game or watching a TV show, maybe like the A Team, and then things like the sound and the composition, the sound design that goes into the effects and stuff like that. You're just kind of digesting it, you know. It's kind of like background elements, and then whether you get, you know, just from getting older, or maybe you find yourself wanting to get into this field, like just re-listening to all that stuff and having like a new appreciation and like a new ear, you know, for really picking apart what you're listening to. It's probably one of my favorite things about, I guess, where I am now is just kind of just going back to things that I used to like and just listening for cues and listening for weird, you know, musical ideas where something that I thought is once like being really strange, you know, is actually something pretty that serves the purpose of what I'm watching or listening to. Right? And I think those kinds of things are definitely my favorite. It's like that little motivation.
Get over here.
Yeah, I'm not that. I think of all of us have had that. I mean, I remember kind of discovering. I mean, I remember being aware of Bernard Herrmann's music because when I was a kid watching those movies on television. But then, as an adult who understood music and had studied music, and then going back and just really deeply appreciating how amazing a composer he was, and how he changed, film scoring and what we thought of as sounding like film scores. And having and the game Voyeur was done in the style of Bernard Herrmann.
Really?
That was my direction, you know, from my friend Robbie Weaver, who said, you know, because it's like Rear Window. Even that, interesting enough, Rear Window was a Hitchcock movie. It did not have any music. It was a
Right.
musicless film, but still, because we associate Hitchcock and Herrmann, we thought, let's do something Bernard Herrmann-esque, even though, you know, the film,
Yeah.
Right.
no music.
So,
Nor did
I guess
Lifeboat, you know.
yeah, these are. I'm kind of going off of the question. Shut up.
We do that. Hey.
I was just gonna say, like, do you find yourself, I guess, wearing your influences on your sleeve? Like, is that something you really kind of lean into when you're going after projects, or is that something, I guess, like as an artist, I think it's easy to identify where your influences come from, but I don't really think it's really until you go about making something and somebody tells you, like, hey, you sound like such and such, that you really like realize how it's been kind of subconsciously put into your art. Do you find it, I guess, easy to go about things, like, you know, really focus on trying
And by the
to
way, people said to Beethoven, hey, you sound like Haydn.
yeah. Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah.
His early 70s. Of course, we're always building on, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel. I mean, every now and then someone comes up with something so out there, but generally we're all building on the shoulders of previous generations of composers, you know. I kind of feel like I have developed my own style, and you know, and yet, I mean, one of the things that I love about writing and films, games, etc., is, you know, when you get challenged to write something, well, boy, I never scored that before. Now I've got to think of what works, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is like you lean on some style like Bernard Herrmann because it kind of like it's cool, you know, to a retro, you know, kind of approach. But very often it's not. It's just something you're just trying to find what uniquely works for this particular project, And sometimes you do want to sound more conventional. I mean, if you think about the scores of 1940s and 50s, there was sort of a language of film scoring, and no one felt like they had to reinvent a wheel to score a film or a television show. You just did what everybody else was kind of doing, and you tried to do a good job composing. You weren't worried about some revolutionary new, but nowadays we're a little over obsessed with trying to do something completely unique, completely new. Right. Something to be said for just like doing something really well, masterly. Like Bach. Bach did not invent Baroque music, but he perfected it. I mean, he's like when we think of Baroque music, he's like the apotheosis. Is that the right word? It's like the guy. He's the man. He's the man. He's the guy that you think of but he did not. But all those the things that he wrote were all within the style of that period. He was not like revolutionary in that sense. He wasn't like a Stravinsky or a Schoenberg,
Right.
So I think both is okay. And so sometimes your influence is to do something that is familiar and that's just like really cool within some style that's you're just sort of writing with that stuff. And then other times there is opportunities like a Bioshock or a Metamorphosis to do something really wildly different, And I like both. I like doing it all. I like writing music in many styles, and I've written pop music.
Really?
Yes, I've got a kind of a well-known song that there's a guy named Matt Harding who used to do this dancing video. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He used to dance all over the world. And so we've got like 50 or 60 million views on one of them.
Huh.
I wrote a really pretty interesting pop song for that.
That's awesome.
Does that ever get? I don't know. I feel like because that's the thing. Like with me, like I'll wake up some mornings. I'm from Florida originally, and I'll be like, "Damn, I live in California now." Like, do you sometimes like wake up like, "Damn, my project got like 50 million views," or like, I'm getting all this praise on the internet for the score I did for this game. Like, does that ever kind of
Get surreal?
Yeah, get surreal sometimes. Like, do you kind of like? Yeah,
My wife and son keep my ego in check.
Fair.
They are not at all impressed with me. Other than,
You're still just dad.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate the fact that people do appreciate my music.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is a wonderful feeling, and it is something that really video games really made happen for me. And then I get opportunities to go and conduct my music or get invited places to speak, and that's wonderful. But I'm definitely, my ego is well in check. I mean, I just really, I think it's better to have your success maybe not when you're too young.
Yeah, I would say
it's like not. I think it's so. I'm not an egotist or anything. I don't think I am. But I do. I'm grateful for it. I think that's the best way to deal with it. Is like just gratitude. Like, how cool is this? I'm so lucky. I know that I am lucky to make my living as a creative person. I know how many people would love to do that. To be able to make your living being creative. That is just a great gift, Not that it's all fun and games; it is work,
Right.
everything is
frustrating
work somehow, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it is actually. But that is really what I think satisfies a human being. Is like to have a challenge and to accomplish it. I mean, it's like people. I mean, you read these articles about people who win the lottery who are miserable. I mean, their lives are like turned upside down, and they're
Right.
dead 5 years of cirrhosis of the liver from alcohol. I mean, literally, it's like it's much better to work hard and to find your joy and your passion, and that's really where satisfaction, life satisfaction comes from.
I think
Come on,
quite
guys.
deep.
You guys
You know
weren't
that's
expecting
deep.
this from the stream today, huh?
I think that is part of what Mario was getting at too, though, where it's you being grateful is in part of that like surreality,
Yeah, right.
where it's like you wake up and you're like, I get to do this, like
Yeah.
this is.
Yeah.
And that's like that's one of the things. Yeah, that's one of the things I really admire about a lot of the people in the game industry. Like basically everyone we've interviewed has been like really not only humble about their their work and their projects and whatever it is, but they're also like really like they're excited to do the stream. They're excited to like show everyone. Because we're a school, so a lot of the time it's like, yeah, we have people coming in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then we have people coming in who are kind of full of themselves. But then, when someone shows up and is talented and is also like humble and like grateful for their opportunity, it makes it so much easier, and it really helps us a lot because it makes us more, I don't know, open in a way.
And actually those are people you want to help.
Yeah, exactly. We'll go out of our way to whatever we need to help those types of people.
Yeah, and that's a cool thing. Without making this sound, I guess, negative in any sort of way, but I feel like all the time, like these interviews, composers, the stream and everything, it feels like we're interviewing like the same guy.
Yeah.
Like to an extent, it's like everybody's got kind of the same attitude about, what it means to be successful, in whatever success means in this industry. But, to be able to wake up every day and be like, my next dollar is probably going to come from some composition I made, or, having the mentality of, I really wanted to do this, or I went and did it, and I didn't let anything stop me. It's kind of cool.
It's very cool.
It's like, oh yeah, so so if you just have this, the right mentality, and at a certain point, like talent means something, but it's all about kind of who you are and how you present yourself, and I guess how people, how receptive people are to you.
Well, I mean, it's like
just as important.
It's like he was saying, it's easier to work with someone who isn't
a jerk.
A jerk, yeah.
Right?
And that's one of the, our old boss would always like say this one thing, when we were doing interviews and stuff. It's like, don't, if you're getting into the industry, as long as you're not an asshole, like people want to work with you.
Yeah,
it's not
exactly.
that. It's not
you don't have to do anything else but not suck.
Yeah.
Number one, don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
Right? it's really
But life lessons are success in the industry. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you definitely want to be someone who people want to work with. And the thing is there's enough talent around that you don't have to work with someone who's really a pain in the butt, So, and Bernard, from everything I heard, Bernard Herrmann was kind of a prickly personality, but but he could afford it. He was so brilliant, he could afford to pay us. But I mean, generally speaking, most people really do want to, get along and just try to have a great time doing something creative. So.
And also, like, in the age of the internet, you're right. There's so much, like, it's not hard to get access to talent. Like, there's talent. There's so many talented people in the world, and now that we're all connected in one way or another, you can